A few months ago, John Harris and I wrote an essay for the New Statesman called No Turning Back. And at the end, at the last minute, the editor asked us to put in 10 points, 10 policy ideas, which would signify no turning back to the pre-crash, pre-recession days. So we rather hastily put together 10 points, the kind of ideas that have been milling around Compass for a while, of course, electoral reform, a living wage, a land tax to replace a council tax, etc. We get a call a few days later from the office of Caroline Lucas, the leader of the Green Party, to say, did you know that 9 of your 10 policies were in the 2005 Green Party manifesto? We didn't. Actually, a bit later in the week, I got a call from Vince Cable's office saying, did you know that 6 out of your 10 policies were in the Liberal Democrat? So these figures are emblazoned in my mind. 9-6-0. The Labour Party didn't sign up to any of the 10 policies that we said would signify no turning back to the old politics. Caroline gets 9 out of 10, so she gets to speak to the Compass conference. Thank you, Caroline.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you in particular to Compass for inviting me to speak. And I do appreciate that from your perspective it was perhaps something of a brave decision. Quite how brave I didn't realise until I came across some of the blogging that was going on about today's conference. And to give you a flavour of what I mean, one of the blogs from a Hackney councillor who announces that he's firmly on the moderate wing of the Labour Party runs as follows. Bonkers, soft left, factionalists Compass have just announced that the latest keynote speaker at their annual rally is Green Party leader Caroline Lucas. In my borough and in Oxford, Norwich and Brighton, the Labour Party is in strategic electoral battle with the Greens. We don't need a dialogue with these single-issue clowns and their anti-working class policies. We need to attack and destroy them. Well, I'm fairly sure that those views aren't shared by the majority of people here. But they do perhaps demonstrate that for some, even the dialogue that we're having today is perceived to be dangerous and potentially undermining. And yet talking with one another and discussing how we as progressives might work more closely together is vitally important. And there couldn't be a better time for us to be doing that. The elections last week were historic in a number of ways, some good, others considerably less so. For the first time since 1989, the Green Party won more than 1 million votes. Our share of the vote rose by more than any other party. And we had some spectacular results in places where we've already proved ourselves on local councils like Brighton and Norwich. And that achievement, I think, was all the more impressive for coming in the midst of a recession. A few weeks ago, the media were predicting that we would struggle to keep our existing seats. And their assumption, against all the evidence, was that in a recession, the Greens do badly. In fact, our concern for fairness, for social justice, and for an economy that puts people first, not big business, is more relevant than ever during hard times. Policies like the Green New Deal, which would create far more real and lasting jobs than the fiscal packages of the current government, make real practical sense to people on the doorsteps. So these elections are the best possible base for us in preparing for the next general election, whenever that may come. But history was being made, of course, elsewhere as well, with the BNP elected to the European Parliament for the first time. It was hugely frustrating that our candidate in the North West, Peter Craney, with support from many progressives and anti-fascists from outside the Green Party, was only just a few thousand votes short of defeating Nick Griffin. We now have a huge responsibility to redouble our efforts to defeat the BNP and everything they stand for, to turn their advance into a resounding defeat, and I'm optimistic that we can. Like Napoleon before Moscow, the BNP's victories leave them exposed, and the more publicity they gain, the more their true colours are revealed. And I believe that if we work together, then the next few months and years will see the BNP taking a long and cold march back to political obscurity. But perhaps the most important historic moment came with the results in the South East region, the heartlands of New Labour. Labour came 5th place, behind UKIP as well as the Greens. Proof, if we needed it, that the era of Blair's big tent politics is well and truly over. New Labour was an experiment to bring together readers of the Mirror and the Daily Mail in a single political movement. We now see how badly it has failed. Greater inequality, loss of trust, timid reforms. The tent was so large and so fragile that the potential to reform politics and society has been squandered. And perhaps the sharpest example of that is the war in Iraq. Many Labour MPs voted against the decision to go to war, but as party members, they naturally continued to support the government, and so Britain went to war. Contrast that with Germany. The governing coalition of Social Democrats and Greens faced the same choice. But had Gerhard Schröder decided to join the US-led alliance, the Greens would not just have voted against it and then carried on. They would have left the coalition and the government would have collapsed as a result. Now, I'm not saying that the decision to go into coalitions is always right, or indeed that Greens in coalitions always make the right decisions. And the example of Ireland shows what happens when they get it wrong. But coalitions have the potential, at least, to be effective. Some people say coalitions are undemocratic. They depend on backroom deals and unprincipled trade-offs. But I say that the opposite can be true, that coalitions can be more honest and more transparent than a party that tries to be all things to all people, and where the backroom deals include the kind of bribery, bullying and smears that characterise the current regime. So what does that mean for us? Well, as part of the progressive left, we share many of the same values, including social justice, the strength that comes from collective responses to collective problems, and a genuine belief that power lies not with elites or special interests, but with the people. So I believe we ought to be working together, not by merging our distinct identities into a popular front, but by accepting and respecting our differences as well as our common vision. Not so much a big tent, but a campsite of smaller tents. How can this be done? Well, I want to make three specific suggestions. First, by accepting that we all have a right to exist. I take no pleasure in seeing the Labour Party, which has achieved great things in the past, coming to its current position. But equally, I reject entirely the view that Greens should join Labour and try and reform it from within. The Greens bring distinctive policies and a distinctive approach to the table. On the environment, of course, where our work on ambitious climate policies is well known, and where our analysis leads us to conclude that market fundamentalism doesn't just need taming, it needs to be completely transformed as we move towards a steady-state economy, an economy characterised not by more and more quantitative growth, but by more qualitative development. But Greens are finally gaining increasing recognition as well for our work on the social justice agenda. In the European Parliament, for example, it's Greens who've been at the forefront of initiatives to challenge the privatisation of public services. It was the Greens who opposed the liberalisation of postal services. We fought to end the UK's opt-out out of the EU Working Time Directive. We promoted the rights of agency workers. We spearheaded efforts to revise the Posting of Workers Directive, challenging the recent European Court rulings, which give more power to the market than to the workers. On the London Assembly, it was the Greens who made the establishment of a living wage unit a condition of their support for Ken Livingstone's budget. And it's Greens on councils up and down the country who've been leading campaigns to introduce a living wage more widely. But we go further than that, calling for a basic income scheme payable to everyone as of right, a maximum wage as well as a minimum wage, a tax on land values, to dampen house price speculation and provide funds for social housing, greater representation of women both in politics and in boardrooms, free social care to the elderly, and raising the single-person state pension to £165 a week. But the second area I want to talk about is the fact that we should continue to meet and to talk and to explore where areas of agreement lie. Today should just be the start. And if I were putting together a list of where we can work together, I'd start with democratic reform, curbing the influence of businesses and lobbyists on political decision-making, restoring our lost human rights, cancelling ID cards and the Trident replacement programme, proper controls on the arms trade, a fairer deal for developing countries. These are the things that matter. Also on the list would be the policies for a Green New Deal, proposals for a massive investment in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, addressing fuel poverty by cutting fuel bills, creating up to 1 million new jobs in Britain,